Hello! So I wanted to make a dress today, however, of course, I am not able to go out and buy fabric. So why buy new when you can just make do? Yes, I came up with that and I think it's really clever. I have these bed sheets, and typically I will say bed sheets are not the best thing to make clothing with because they can feel kind of weird, especially if it's a really luxurious kind of bed sheet, but these ones are not luxurious. These are 100% polyester. Let's go make a dress. They say that in order to be successful, you should visualize your goals. So before I started really making this dress, I tried to visualize what it could look like literally by using an existing garment. So I really liked the neckline of this shirt and could sort of see what the waist might look like with a bit of fabric, and I pinned up the sleeves to get a general impression of what I was going for. I then used a bit of tape to mark the neckline on the dress form. If you don't have tape, you can also just use a thin ribbon for something like this. Next, I pretended to know how to drape a bodice and just went for it. I've watched some videos on how to do this, so let me just talk you through the basics. First, you're gonna put it on the front of the body. You're just taking your mock-up fabric. This could be a muslin. In this case, it's an old cotton that I have. You're gonna put it on the front and line it up against the center because we're only making half of it, right? Because it's gonna be symmetrical on both sides. So you line it up and you pay attention to where the seams are. The shoulder seam, the side seam, where the waistline is, where you want the neckline to be. And you're going to use the fabric to actually see how it's gonna lay. This also helps you place where the dart should be. Should it be in the waist? Do you want it on the bust? Do you want it on the shoulder? In my case, it's going on the bust. Once you have it in place, then you can use some chalk to mark where all of those seams and the dart should go. You repeat this then on the back, and you can cut it out and stitch it together using a basting stitch or even just some pins and see how it actually fits on the dress form and then on your body. In this case, it fit the dress form wonderfully. However, it turns out that this dress form, this stuffed embodiment of a beauty standard, if you will, had a higher bust line than my own. So I drew on a new nipple dot, a bust point for you professionals out there, and gently reminded myself that I don't have to compare my body to a stuffed mannequin. So you repeat this like 15 more times and bam, you have a pattern. Next, I needed to trace my pattern pieces onto paper so I could, feel more like a professional. So I used some red tracing paper and my tracing wheel, which was exactly where I had already looked. And I used that to transfer the fabric pattern onto paper, cut out the pattern, and then do some math. So what I want to do is I want the bust dart to slant and not be quite as deep. It felt really weird looking at it to have this big just horizontal line coming out from underneath my arm. And looking at the other shirt that I have, it looks a little bit more natural, a little bit moved off to the side and down for this more relaxed style of top. If we take the halfway point between here and here. At this point, I proceeded to explain to you for 10 minutes exactly how I was going to lower that dart line. But unsurprisingly, that was really boring. So here's what I was trying to actually say. After I drew the new nipple dot location, I needed to rework the dart as a whole. So I just eyeballed where I wanted those new dart lines to be. And then once I had it generally in place, I just needed to make sure that the two dart lines were equal in size, and then also that the total length of the side was equal to the original length, so that when I sewed the dart in place and sewed the front to the back, they would actually match up. Now, in this case, it ended up being a little bit shorter than before, so I decided to just add some extra length to the bottom. I have no idea if this was a good idea or not, but it worked, so it was. Okay, scrap everything. Okay, not everything. As I was looking a little bit closer at my design plans for this dress, I'm like, you know what? This looks a little bit familiar. So it turns out I have a dress that's somewhat similar, not exactly, but similar enough that I'd like a different kind of dress in my closet, or at least something that's in a different color or a slightly different style. So we're gonna use this blue sheet instead. It's a little bit softer. This one I believe is cotton, but it's not bad cotton. It's still it's still good clothing cotton. So we're gonna use that, but we'll use the black one in like a future video, so stay tuned for that. But let's get started. I decided to use the fitted sheet because everyone hates the fitted sheet, and I thought it'd be really satisfying to cut it up. So I removed the elastic from the edges and I cut in the corner seam so that it would lay flat, and then gave it a good press. You wanna see the most satisfying thing ever? Then I placed my very professional pattern pieces onto the fabric and used equally professional weights to hold them down as I traced around them. Then I cut them out, basted them together, and tried it on with my new lowered nipple points. Bust darts. So I feel a little bit like Aladdin. It's gonna be right about there. I'm realizing now that I probably didn't leave quite enough to do a really good button flap, because if you can imagine, if it's meeting here, oh, I'll figure it out later. I think I've got enough to barely make it. Future Jessie here, you don't. Overall, it hangs nice. It's about what I want, so that when there's a waistband, it'll be still just a little bit baggy. And you can see the bust dart here looks a lot more natural since it's not actually a fitted bodice. This is gonna work. I think I'm gonna add just a little bit more. I'm gonna lower the arm side, which is the armhole, so that there's a little bit more room in the arm because it feels a little tight, and I don't think it's just from all the extra fabric here. That might be. Let me add another snip. I think if I drop it down by like maybe ½ an inch on each side and then round out that curve, it'll be just a little bit more comfortable. So we'll do that, and I'm gonna figure out how to actually finish these seams. So I then finagled the armhole and then moved on to drafting the sleeve. Now, sleeves are notoriously awful, but I found a tutorial from Eloa, and she makes it a little bit less awful, or quite a bit less awful. And I'm linking her tutorial. I'm linking her tutorial below because she makes it so easy. Thank you, I love you. Then I tried on a mock-up and felt a little bit like Bucky Barnes, and then made the real sleeve and positioned it in place while getting some much needed socialization. Yeah, anytime there's like something buzzing near my head now, I'm like, oh, I can't. So remember how I thought I had left enough fabric for the buttons, but actually didn't? Well, I had to add some more fabric to the bodice to make that space. So I created what's called a button placket, and I made it by sewing 2 strips of fabric right sides together, and then ironing the seam to one side. Then you can do a top stitch on the side that has the seam. Then you can iron it closed, and this will create a clean finish that will stay flat even after it's washed. And then I attached it to the bodice like this. Okay, so this is the placket here for the buttons. What we're looking at, this is the inside of the jacket. Here's the armhole. Here's the side seam. I want the buttons to go along this line. So this is the wrong side, and this is the right side. So the way that this attaches is the placket has the stitch side. You can kind of see the stitch there, and then the smooth side. And I of course want the smooth side on the front and not on the inside. So if I open this up, essentially what I'm saying is we're gonna sew right sides together. Once that is sewn down, if you can imagine, this is all stitched right here. This then will open up and curve around the inside like that. So it'll look like that on the outside. So I've already done the other side. So I stitched right sides together. This is how it will look from the outside. And on the inside, we can see this is all the placket piece right here. We'll trim this down and then actually sew the inside of the placket to that piece of trim right there, and then just make that a finished seam. So this will all be one seam, and then from the outside it'll still be completely smooth. I also made a neckliner to finish the neck hole by using the same professional pattern to cut the same shape as the neck, just 2 inches wide. Then I attached it to some light interfacing and sewed it right sides together to the neck hole, then turned it inside out so that it actually rested inside of the neck hole. Then I sewed the liner to the seam, which, just like the button placket, keeps it flat without showing stitches on the front of the garment. Finally, it was time to do the best part, which was the skirt. So skirts can be a little bit complicated if you've never done it before because it does require some geometry, but this site makes it so much easier. This is a circle skirt calculator by moodfabrics.com, which I've linked down below. But they make it really easy. You plug in how you want to measure it, you plug in your desired length, and then your desired fullness and your waist measurement. So I went with a half circle, which gives it a little bit of fullness, but it's not like, you know, overwhelming full gigantic skirt. And I actually added some extra length to the waist measurement so that I could gather it and add some extra fluffiness to it. So you do that, you press calculate yardage, and it gives you a couple things. First, it tells you how much fabric you actually need, which is valuable if you're buying for the first time. But what I am always most interested in is the waist radius. This is the distance from, if you have your fabric folded, as you can see here, the distance from the corner to this little circle edge right here, because that is how much you need to do in order to get the correct waist width. So once I had that waist radius to use, I traced that onto the folded corner of my fabric, and then I measured down 3 feet beyond that so that the skirt would overall be about 2 feet long. After trying it on, I decided though that it still wasn't quite floofy enough, so I added an extra pizza slice panel to the back, and then disaster struck. So because I wasn't going out to buy new supplies for this project, I was relying on my collection of old buttons that I have. But when I dumped them out to see what buttons I wanted to use, I realized that I didn't have more than 6 buttons of the same kind. And that really isn't enough to go all the way down from the top of the bodice to the bottom of the skirt. But of course, I also couldn't just stop at the opening of the waistline because the waist wasn't big enough to fit over my hips on its own. It needed a little bit more give. So I had to figure out a way to add some sort of small slit to the top of the skirt at the waist so that I could use fewer buttons but still make a big enough opening for it to fit correctly. So to figure this out, I pinned up a piece of fabric to try to imagine how this might work. And for some reason, I thought that this was the right solution. So I just tried cutting a slit and adding some extra fabric to make it look like the button placket continued down. Except then I realized that the top of the bodice overlaps, but a slit doesn't. Luckily, my spatial reasoning kicked in and I realized that I could still do a slit, but just like attach a placket on top and kind of finagle it to make it look natural. So let me show you now how to make a nice slit at the top of a skirt. First, you need to cut out a little piece of fabric to use as your lining. I finished the edge so that it wouldn't fray. Then you pin it right sides together over the spot where you want the slit to be. Now this part's a little weird, so stay with me, but you're basically gonna sew a super narrow V shape down one side of where you want the slit to be and then back up the other. Then you take your scissors and snip down where the slit should be, being careful not to cut the stitches on either side. Then you can turn the lining to the back side and iron it in place. It's a little tricky to get it to lay flat, but I believe in you. So I attached my button placket to one side, then gathered the whole skirt and sewed it to the bodice. At this point, I also made a little waist tie by sewing 2 strips right side together and turning inside out before ironing it flat and doing a top stitch to keep it flat forever. Finally, I hemmed the sleeves and the skirt, and oh my gosh, several weeks of work is miraculously condensed into like 12 minutes. So this project has taken a lot longer than I expected it to. I added up the hours and so far we are at 28 hours put into this project. I just have to add buttons and buttonholes. I have to... Is that it? I need to add belt loops. We're gonna get this wrapped up today, I hope. Do a little photo shoot and show you guys the finished product. So good news is, I got the first button sewed on. The bad news is, I sewed it on backwards. I completely forgot that I'm trying to use the gold side. I just feel like that is perfectly indicative of how this entire project has been going. In between each of the shots that I've been filming, it has been like a, oh look, I did this thing. Oh wait, I did it wrong. The buttonholes, I sewed the first buttonhole in the wrong place and I had to rip out the entire thing and re-sew it, and it's still not perfect, but we're moving forward anyway. I then proceeded to sew the button on backwards a second time, but eventually I got them on, I whipped up a few belt loops, and now we are ready for the montage. Well guys, we did it. This dress took me 30 hours to complete. I was dutifully going at it for like 2 to 4 hours a day for a while, but there's definitely a lull in the middle that I'm just like, I don't want to finish this. Or I just can't bring myself to. Each day I would wake up, I'm just like, it's quarantine. I don't need to do this right now, right? Ultimately, I'm really glad that, well, first that it's done, but also I'm really happy with how it turned out. It has a nice swish to it. It's really comfortable. It's exactly what I had in mind, which is like, whoa, I made this thing. It's not perfect, especially because it's made out of a bed sheet. It means that it's really wrinkly. It wrinkles really easily, and it attracts dust like nothing else. You wouldn't expect that of a bed sheet, but that's exactly what happens. I made a dress for a Renaissance festival once out of a bed sheet, and that thing was brown by the time I got home because it just like attracts dust like a magnet. But I'm not too worried. I'm just gonna be wearing this around the house. I made it so that because the arms are so long, it means that it keeps me warm when the AC turns on, which is like a really weird thing to need. I've got the AC like right above me when I'm working, and so this is going to be perfect. Anyway, I just want to say thank you so much for following along if you made it this far in the video. Now, if you've been following my channel before now, you probably know me for my marketing content and copywriting training. But little announcement here, this channel from here on out is just going to be about sharing what I love. So in that case, it means sewing and crafting, and expect to see stuff on cosplay and historical garments. Fingers crossed, I've got some pretty cool, well, in my opinion, pretty cool video ideas planned out, so I hope to have you along for the ride. But thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. I'm too lazy to take it off. Don't judge me. Cool, so we're done.